Tell me about your strengths and weaknesses. How do you answer one of the most common questions that could be given to you in the medical job interview? Hi, I'm Anthony, the Career Doctor. I make videos on YouTube for other doctors to help with career challenges, things like the job application process. At the moment, we're focusing in on the interview phase of job applications because that's what's happening at this time of the year in Australia and New Zealand for medical trainees. So if you're finding these videos helpful, I'd really encourage you to subscribe and turn on notifications so that it helps me out, but also helps you to know when there is a new video available. Please also tell your friends about the channel. We've hit over 100 subscribers now, so that's great, but we'd really like to nudge it up to 1,000, hopefully not in too much time, because me getting more access to more trainees is helpful in terms of the amount of time that I can spend providing some of this free information for you. So, the strengths and weaknesses question, a common question that can come up in the medical trainee interview. How do we go about approaching this question? Well, some key points I want to highlight to you is that, firstly, the panel will almost certainly ignore your response to the strengths question. At least not weigh it as highly as your response to the weaknesses question. Why is that? Well, as we've pointed out before, negatives tend to outweigh positives in work environments by a significant amount, probably 5 to 1. And so if you're talking about your weaknesses, that will be more memorable and more significant to a panel member, and they will be more inclined to judge you on how you address your weaknesses versus your strengths. We're not wanting to pick people with weak points that we don't think we're comfortable with. For that reason, often the question is just asked in a tell us about your weaknesses perspective, and they just drop the whole strength thing altogether. And it can also overlap with things like the challenges question. So you often don't get the weaknesses question and the challenges question in the same interview because there's a fair degree of overlap. This is an example of a question where, even if it's not particularly explicit, using some examples with something like the STAR approach can be useful to highlight what you're talking about. And as I said, it's similar to the challenges question. So if you get the weaknesses question, you're probably not going to get the what are the challenges for you taking up this job question, but you could, but unlikely. So let's talk about strengths first, and let's talk about my approach to choosing strengths. So firstly, I think the strengths that you choose should be tailored and appropriate to the position that you're going for. What do I mean by that? Well, here's an example. If, for example, you're going for a medical registrar position and you've got a good ability to stay on top of tasks, that would be a strength that you could mention that's relevant to being a med reg, because medical registrars are often dealing with lots of competing priorities and having to balance tasks and stay on top of things. Of course, if you say that, you need to be able to back it up with evidence, particularly from third parties like referees. Secondly, it should try to be something that's fairly unique to you as a candidate and avoid things that other people might be able to also say, which doesn't therefore help you to stand out. So, for example, if you're applying for a job where it's a team with a bit of a research focus, maybe in your medical studies you did an honours year where you learnt to write statistical software. So that would be a fairly unique strength that you could bring to that team that would help you to stand out. Things to avoid with the strengths question are the obvious strengths that everybody's going to cite. So things like being a team player, everyone says they're a team player. Being a hard worker, everyone says they work hard. Being passionate about whatever you're applying for. No one is not going to say that they're passionate. Not passionate, why are you applying for the job in the first place? Avoid some of those obvious strengths that the panel members are probably going to hear from other candidates. Not that you can't talk about some of these things in this question, it's just they shouldn't be the actual strength. But you can refer to them as part of your answer to the strengths, examples and questions. Let's move then on to weaknesses. So weaknesses, this is a tricky area, and I think the key here is to pick something that's a weakness but not a really, really bad weakness. Something that is understandable to the panel can resonate with, but something that also can be improved or fixed as a weakness. And it's not going to be a deal breaker. Also pick something that shows a bit of insight into you as a person, something that shows that you as a professional is interested in growth and development, has looked at your strengths and weaknesses over time and identified your strengths and hung on to them as valuable tools, but looked at improving weaknesses. So something that you've picked as a weakness some time ago is good. And then if you've picked it a while ago, you should have been improving on it. So in your example of weakness, and a weakness that you've identified, that's understandable and fixable, but something that you've been developing and sort of turning from a weakness into not such a weakness or even a strength already. So an example might be the learner, let's say you've always learned better from clinical experiences and patients rather than book reading around more hypothetical matters, and you sort of struggle a little bit to do the reading. So you might give that as your example to the panel. Then in terms of the actions and the results, if we're using the STAR approach, you would then talk about how you've already recognized this issue, and because you know that it's going to be important for the next phase of training, you've challenged yourself by enrolling in a degree program which requires some regular reading so that it helps you to alter your habits, and that you've had some good successes in your results and your readings so far. So there's an example of an understandable yet relatable to the job weakness that is fixable, and actually you've identified it and you've been working on it, and it's not such a weakness after all. Again, there are probably some weaknesses that you should avoid talking about, again, because they're the sort of things that a lot of people will cite. They won't help you to stand out, and they're expected by the panel, and the panel sort of will think there's not a lot of depth to your answering, or and you haven't developed insight into yourself as a person. So avoid things like being too hardworking. It's a strength that you should avoid. It's also a weakness you should avoid. And things like attention to detail. These are things that a lot of candidates will talk about, and they probably won't talk about in depth. They won't talk about how they've been changing them from a weakness to not such a weakness or even a strength. So that's my thoughts on the strengths and weaknesses question in the medical interview.